Hello, good people. Welcome back. Let's continue with our class lessons. Last time we did classics, whereby we were doing the increment of the number of kids from the inc_num_kids function. I hope we are in order up to there. Now, today I'd like us discuss something on class. Basically, we're going to do object types, but we have different object types. We have class and instance object types, right? So I'm going to use the examples we've had so that we can be able to understand what we mean by this. So in a normal scenario, we have both a class and an instance, right? For example, in our previous lab, we have a class, right? Then we have an instance of a class. So this is a class, then instance of a class. Now, from what we're trying to understand here, we're trying to have the object type of each, right? In that, as we've seen here, in that we have object type of a class and then object type of one instance. So that's the difference between a class and an instance. So for a class attribute, now the one which holds basically it holds the whole program, the one which, so for a class attribute, a class attribute for this one, it's shared among all instances of the class. We're going to do an example of this, and you'll see how a class attribute is shared among all the instances. Now, this is a class. When you have an attribute here of this class, it can be shared among all the attributes. Right here we just have one attribute. Let me see. Okay, for example, here this was our class 5 example. This is a class attribute. This is a class. These are classes, right? Then we have an instance of a class being Alice and Barbara. So what we're saying is a class attribute that we can have it here can be used by both instances we have. So we have Alice, we have Barbara. We can have another instance. Let's say we call Carlton, etc. So basically that's what we mean when we say a class attribute is shared among all instances of that class. And what I've just shown you is another, so it's shared and then it is defined within the scope of the class. I hope I've just shown you that of the class. So what we mean by being defined within the scope of the class is that it's being defined here, right? And that we can have class employee, we can have maybe wage, we can have wage here. Sorry, it can't be there. When we click enter here, we can have wage. Now this will be a class. This will be a class attribute, right? So these are attributes. So you can have a class attribute being defined within the scope of the class. I hope that makes sense. So I've shown you how we define. I've shown you how a class attribute is shared among instances of the class and how it is defined within the scope of the class. I hope that makes sense of a class attribute. Okay, we're going to do an example after this, but I hope that makes sense for a class attribute. For an instance attribute, first, before I define what an instance attribute is, what it does, I've shown you what an instance is. Let me do it again. This is a class, right? This is an instance of a class, right? So what does an instance, okay, let's get qualities of an instance of an attribute, of an instance attribute. So basically this can be unique, So it has the ability of being unique to each instance. I hope what we mean here is each instance can have its own unique attributes. For example, in our class 5 lab, right, this is unique to this instance, right? As well, for Barbara, we have the wage being unique to it. That's what we mean by it can have unique for each can be for each instance. I hope we've seen that and we've done in our examples. We shall do an example and then we see how. Okay, basically we have an example, but we can write another example to show the differences between how all this can be achieved. Let's do an example using class 7.py. Yeah, so what we're trying to do here is basically attributes of a class and instance. Now, so let's do an example. We're going to do an example of right now we had some Olympic races, we had some international races being done. So let's do an example of using a marathon run. Yeah, so this is a class, right? So we can have a class instance here. You can have not a class instance, you can have a class attribute. Sorry, you can have a class attribute, not an instance. A class attribute. We'll have an instance later. You can have a class attribute here, right? So we can say what we want to have as a class attribute here is the distance of the race, right, being so that it can be shared between the instances of the class. Let's say it's 30.20. that will be in kilometers. So as we've said, each class have the unique init method, which normally it must have the self parameter. So we can say self.speed is equals to 0 for a start. Then you can have another method. You can say get speed method. You must have the self attribute. Then you can have other attributes after that. Then you can have, let's use pass for now. We will come back to that later. Yeah. Now this is our class. Now let's have an instance of a class. Within our class we have our class attribute here. So we can have this as let's comment this class attribute. Yeah. Now let's have the instance of our class. We're going to say runner 1. So let's create an instance of our class. So we'll have marathon runner. Then so we now have runner 1 being an attribute of our class. We will have runner 1, yes, being an instance of a class, not an attribute. Now let's do runner 1 dot speed, right? So we can have it being you can have runner 2 as well, being another instance of the class. So it's equals to just same thing as we've done for that. So then you can have runner 2 dot speed. This can be 6.9 or 6.6, right? So when we do a print, we'll see each. We'll see the. Right now we're talking about the instance of an attribute, right? So here they are unique. This is unique and this is unique. Now let's do a print. So when we do a print, we want to have it, so we'll say runner. Sorry. Runner 1 speed. Around speed. Basically, we're just printing what we've had. Then we can do print as well. Then we do runner 2. So it's runner 2 dot speed. Yeah, I hope that's clear. So when we go to classes, then we do Python. Do Python class 7. We see both having, we just have printed out each the different attributes of each instance. I hope that's clear. So as well, instance attribute, they are created using the dot notation. I hope that we've seen that dot notation. We've seen how that has been done. For example, self.speed, right? So it's equals to whichever number, 0 or 9. So we've said instance attributes, they are created using a dot notation. This is done within a method, right? Now to show this in an example, this is self.speed equals to 0. So what we're saying is it's created using a dot notation. Here is the dot notation, self.speed, right, within a method. Or another way it can be created is when we did runner 1, when we are outside the class scope, outside of the class scope, so we can do a thing like runner 1 dot speed is equals to 9. I hope that's clear over how the instance attribute can be created. So another thing which we have to keep in our mind in this is that instance, right? Instance and a class namespace. Basically, the naming of the either instance and the class. What I mean is, this is an instance of a class, right? This is an instance namespace, and this is a class namespace. So what we're saying is, the instance and class namespace are linked to each other. I hope that's clear. In that, what does this help us, or what does this imply? If a name is not found in an instance, your name is not found in an instance namespace, the next stage whereby the search is done is the class namespace. I hope that makes sense. Namespace is searched. I hope that makes sense and it's clear. We've covered so far the class and instance object types, and I hope we are on the same page. That will be it for today, covering the class and instance object types. So maybe to as we close this up, let's do a definition of class attribute. Class object, just to ensure that we are on the same page. Instance attribute, instance attribute, instance object, instance object, instance methods. These are most important things which we've covered so far. So what is a class object, right? So a class object is, we can start with a class object. So a class object is a variable shared class attribute, sorry, instead of the class attribute, not a class. There's an option I'm defining. A variable shared within shared with all instances of the class. We've seen this. I hope that's clear. And we've seen that a class attribute, this is a class attribute, it's shared between the instances of the class. For a class object is a factory for creating new class instance. That's clear for class object. An instance attribute. Instance attribute is a variable that existing on a single instance. For an instance object, instance object is instance object represents a single instance class. And finally, an instance method are functions instance methods, functions that are also class attributes, that are also class attributes. So basically these are most of the things we've covered, all the things we've covered so far in our I can call this brainstorm. So these are the things we've covered so far in our journey for instance and object types, and we've seen examples. I hope everything is clear, and we can cover one or two examples, then we can call it, we shall have hard knowledge on class and instance object types. Thank you for your time. See you in the next one. Bye.